way that Dr. Hogan sees the personality of leaders affecting business unit performance. So you can see that it starts here, personality affects leadership style, and through these different channels is how it ultimately affects business unit performance. Now you can ignore these bits here, that's more about personality and this is more about cognitive ability. But here's where we're focused on. When we're looking at values, is that the personality of the leader, their values, affects the culture that they create, and some cultures are more or less conducive to creating positive business unit performance. So just kind of show you how we see it all tying together. Now looking at the value of values for teams. This is one of my favorite applications of values, is to look at it at the team level. Whenever you're looking at it at the team level, you can help to understand the similarities and differences within that team. To understand what they find to be important or not so important. You can look for points of convergence where they have similarities, and that's what we call anchors. You can look where there's a lot of discrepancy or a lot of spread. And ultimately what we're finding is you can also find what we call cliques. And these are subcultures within a team. These subcultures is where you have a camp of people who value one thing and another camp of people within the same team who don't value that same thing. They value something different. And you can see how it can be difficult for those teams to be successful if they can't create that type of unity and vision. And that's ultimately what we find in our research, is there's kind of an ideal point for the number of anchors or similarities that you want to see in a team. Now, what happens if we're looking at the values of a team and they're all over the board? There are no anchors whatsoever, no points of convergence on those values. They don't value any of the same things. They can't create that unity, vision, and direction because they all have competing priorities. Now, what happens when you have the reverse? Let's say that we have every anchor possible. We look exactly like everybody else on our team. The risk is groupthink, or what might be called dry rot. And that is the fact that if we all value the same things to the same extent, we will not challenge each other. We will not have diversity in thought. And we won't grow. Because we don't see any reason for change, because we're all seeing the world through the same pair of glasses. So it's really important to have a balance there. And our friends in New Zealand have done some really cool research with this. They found that looking at senior management teams of organizations, the executive team, they found that if you have, you remember the MVPI, we had the 10 scales on there? They found that if you had around 4 anchors, it was the ideal point. And that the number of anchors was significantly related to overall organization performance, to the value of the stock price. It was tied to the values of the executive team, and what similarities they had and what differences they had. So it can certainly have a real impact at the team level too. Now we move up to the value values for organizations. Value values for organizations. I think that Ben Schneider did a lot of great work for this. Are you familiar with the attraction, selection, attrition theory? Basically, it's this idea that birds of a feather flock together. Similar people, when left to their own devices, they coalesce with other people who are like them. It's natural. You're like me, hey, I'm more comfortable with you. The same thing happens within organizations. And the idea is that we as an organization attract people who are similar to us. We select or hire people who are similar to us. And people who get into the organization and don't feel like us attrit. They leave. That's the attrition part. What that leads to is increasing homogeneity within the organization. So we have less and less diversity within an organization. This is natural. This is what occurs in most organizations. What's great is that helps to develop a strong culture. It can be good, but it cannot be left unchecked. We need to make sure that we continue to infuse diversity of thought while still having reverence for the existing culture and the way we go about doing things. I think it's also important to know that a building does not have a culture. Okay? You know, that may be where your office is. You may put things on the wall. You may paint the walls a certain color. You have different types of furniture. But that itself is not the culture. The people make the place. The people make the place. And this is what we collectively value as the employees of an organization that ultimately inform what the culture of that organization is going to be, what we value. So I think it's important to recognize that. And I think that it also speaks to the way that we go about assessing culture can use some help. For example, there are many consultants who make a lot of good money in doing cultural surveys, where they go in and they try to assess the culture of an organization. I think that's fine. But what we have to understand, some of them are good, a lot of them aren't that good to be honest, but some of them are good. But what we have to realize is whenever we're doing a survey like that, we are being asked to interpret and analyze an independent, amalgamous object, the culture of the organization. We're trying to fill out a survey and say, this is what we are like. But if you believe what I said just a couple slides ago, we project our own attitudes and values onto the organization. So our perceptions of the our perceptions of the organization, our perceptions of other people, are inherently affected by our own values. So that's part of the challenge if you're doing a survey. Now, I would argue that instead, if you really want to understand the culture of an organization, you need to find out what each person values. You need to find out through assessment what it is that's important for them. And then you take all that information together and you aggregate it, and that's what creates the culture. That's how you identify what we collectively value. That's going to inform what our norms are, the way we go about doing business. So I'm not saying abandon cultural surveys, but just realize that there's another part of it. I think a really individual assessment of values is the best way of doing it. And that's where you get into the really fun stuff. I love this part of it. Because then what you do, you assess all these values and you see what the culture is. And then you go into their lunchroom. Go into the cafeteria, the lunchroom, and they'll have some shiny poster on the wall that says, we are this. These are our core values as an organization. You look at the poster, you look at your scientific results, and you see that they don't match. So we start to find out that the actual values of the organization do not necessarily match what we call poster values. Just because you put a poster up in the lunchroom does not mean that you've changed the culture. It does not mean that now, oh, okay, that's who we are? Okay, now I'll find that to be important. It doesn't work like that. And so it makes for some really rich consulting, to be honest, because then you talk to the leadership, you say, okay, I know this is what you want to be, but this is who you have. So you need to decide what are you going to do about that. And it's also really cool when you start to analyze and you find out that the leadership of the organization is completely disconnected from the rest of the organization. You'll see that the leadership team has some set of values, and it's totally different from what you see in the people down below. And then you start to dig a little bit more, and you find out they feel it. You go talk to the individual employees, and they'll say, leadership doesn't get us. We don't feel like we're a part of the same organization. And that's because of values. It's because of values at the organization level where we see that type of difference occurring.